Hello and welcome back to the Bitcoin Mentor podcast. Today I'm joined by Michael Sutherlin. Hey, Michael, how are you?
Doing well, Jake. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm excited to embark on another journey with another Bitcoin mentor and learn all about yourself and what brings you to this point in time and to the table with Bitcoin Mentor. So, luckily, you've had to listen to some of the previous episodes, and anyone listening in that hasn't listened to a previous episode, I always recommend to go back and check it out from number one. But equally, we're here with Michael today to learn about him. So, Michael, take me back in time. Like, where's home for you? What were you interested in as a teenager? And eventually we'll get to talking about Bitcoin, but I'm just intrigued as to like some of your highlights and expertise from the start of your life.
Yeah, so I born and raised in Southern California, born in Long Beach, and I've grown up kind of all across the Southern California area. In the States, that gets a bit of a bad rap. A lot of people hate on LA and California, but I always try to make the distinction between people who are born and raised here and people who moved here from like Ohio with dreams of fame and fortune and acting or something. So yeah, I love it here. Born and raised, it's beautiful here.
Yeah, I'd love to come and visit. I have visited LA once in the past, and there are a lot of characters knocking around, kind of working behind the bar, who look like they could be in a movie, but definitely aren't. So from that experience, I'm going to make a bunch of judgments as to the comment you just made, which is fun to think through. Anywhere you are in the world, there's different types of characters that turn up, aren't there? And so, what was life like growing up in Long Beach? Through school, was there any areas of particular interest that you had, and what did you go on and study if you did a degree?
Yeah, I remember all throughout my childhood having a bit of like ADHD brain where I would basically become super obsessed and hyperfixated on one topic before later discarding it and moving on to the next thing that captured my attention. A number of those things were like the American Revolutionary War, different strategy board games, sports. So a lot of like fragmented interests that don't seem to have a real through line, but um, yeah, I think until finding Bitcoin, I know we'll get into that a little bit later, but that's part of why I think it captured my attention so much is I just haven't even come close to scratching even the surface of the rabbit hole. So
Well, let's do that. That's what I love about these conversations because everyone's journey through life is unique. One, that is a true fact that we all know. But the things that we did during that seemingly uncorrelated set of experiences that then make us look more closely at Bitcoin, I find fascinating. So, what board game was it? Or what sport was it? Or just take us straight through that. We can get right to Bitcoin, like in that sense. So, what were some of these seemingly unrelated experiences that drew together to help you reach a conclusion that was Bitcoin is something you want to look at?
yeah, I think I was always just very curious. I liked asking the question why all the time. I wanted to know why things were the way that they were. And I found that history in particular really captured my attention because I think I was able to connect things that I observed today with past events. And just in terms of general interest, I've always liked strategy games. I was always interested in math growing up. I went on to study stats and finance at university, played soccer my entire life, and then ended up playing rugby in college.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, I've always enjoyed kind of the team aspect of sports and kind of like finding my specific role and niche on the team and playing it to the best of my abilities.
Awesome. It's not often that I meet guys that grew up in the States that played rugby. So rugby union was a big sport in the south of the UK where I grew up. And yeah, as a teenager, absolutely obsessed with playing it. It's great fun. You touch on a number of things there that we can draw from. In particular, that history idea. So what moments in history did you study that you could draw parallels to today?
I think the American Revolutionary War was one that was especially fascinating to me. I loved the idea of building a new system and not reforming an old and corrupt system.
Mm.
And I think there are a ton of parallels to that, today within the Bitcoin space, certainly. But just the idea of the solution needing to come from outside of the existing paradigm, the existing system.
If you are unfamiliar with the American Revolution, what was happening? When was this? What was the old system? Why was it corrupt? And how did they fix it?
Yeah, so I mean, this is the late 1700s. a subsect of British colonists had come over to the New World and set up some different colonies there. And the main kind of tipping point was the idea of taxation without representation. And the colonists basically felt like they were being exploited, and they took action in separating off from their British leadership and starting something anew that didn't have that brought in new ideas instead of kind of trying to reform this old corrupt system, the system that at least they felt was corrupt.
And so, what do you mean by taxation without representation?
Well, the people at the time, I think they framed it like their energy was being stolen from them without them having a say in how that energy was being used. I think that they felt like they were basically being used as slaves to a certain extent. And I guess not in like the traditional way of slavery that we think about today, but just in terms of not actually fully owning the labor and the things that they were producing.
To take that one step further, and I mean, I'm no expert in the American Revolution, so I'm asking this for myself in many ways. So essentially, the British Empire had taken control of North America and was taxing the population of North America very heavily in the eyes of local residents of the place, and they decided to change things. Essentially, it's like, why do we not have any say on what that tax does, or etc.? Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, looking back on it, I mean, it's funny. The taxes at the time were minuscule compared to what we're all paying today.
Really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know the exact numbers, but we're talking about a couple percent tax on tea, and they were ready to blow the entire system up. And we're sitting
Wow.
around here today getting 30, 40, 50% of our income taxed, our property taxed, and kind of just chugging along, seemingly unbothered by it.
Wow. And that's so fascinating, isn't it? Okay. And so let's draw parallels to today then. So a man in late 1700s America is like upset about being taxed by someone that they can't have any say about or what the proceeds of it do. How similar is that to today? Are we being overtaxed now compared to the population 200-300 years ago? And is today a situation of taxation without representation, just in a different guise?
But it's almost more dishonest than that. People have a general idea of the sales tax that they pay, the property tax that they pay, but I think in Bitcoin, the one that we're trying to bring attention to is this hidden tax that's inflation.
Mm.
And I'm kind of curious your experience, but most of the people that I know, they don't understand what inflation is really at all, even at a basic level. Maybe the price of things go up a little bit over time, but framing it to them as, well, really, I think you need to go to the beginning, which is what is money, and what does expanding the money supply actually mean? And if the money is just a representation of our time and energy, and somebody else has the ability to print more of those representations of our time and energy out of thin air, then they basically have unfettered access to steal your time and energy. And I think that's what we see a lot of today.
And people don't even realize. That's why when you talk about being dishonest, that's exactly why it's so dishonest, because people don't even understand they're being stolen from. Now that I'm in my mid 30s with a couple of kids, I have kids' books all over the place. And my daughters love reading. And there is a book, shout out to Brecky who made it. It's called Rhyming Bitcoin. And so it's a kids' book about Bitcoin. And so I actually think it's one of the best explanations in very short form as to like why increasing the money supply is dishonest and bad. I hope that more families end up buying this book and reading it in that environment, because you suddenly go, hang on, that doesn't make sense. What do you mean? If they can make more money, then what? That's just unfair, isn't it? And my
Right.
experience of inflation, Michael, is typical of growing up in the UK. I lived and worked in Singapore, and I now live in Australia. Inflation is built into all financial calculations as CPI, and we just kind of blindly trust that the government and the bank are doing the right thing for us. But very few people have asked the question, what is money? And very few people have significantly reallocated their time and resources into Bitcoin. So It's probably pretty similar in the States, frankly. Like it's not that big a problem. When I interviewed on my previous podcast people who grew up in places like Venezuela, it's a fucking problem, and they do something about it. So probably perhaps quite similar in that sense.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of people here believe the CPI number. They believe the CPI calculation, and they're missing that the basket of goods that's included in the CPI calculation are constantly shifting and changing. And that's another way in which inflation is so dishonest, is that the products and services that are being included in the CPI calculation are getting lower in quality, lower in value. They used to include maybe a 2-bedroom home and an entertainment budget that included going out to multiple movies every month. And now, well, all you need is a studio apartment and you have your Netflix subscription. And instead of your grass-fed beef and your eggs, it's like, well, just eat some Doritos. And that's, it's really another way in which the real cost of inflation is being hidden by the people perpetrating it.
It's wild, isn't it? And the more you look at it, the more you're like, what the hell's going on? I like the phrase, so Bitcoin is hard to see, but Bitcoin is very hard to unsee. Once you get it, you're like, hang on, what the hell's going on over here? This doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And I think that's why we end up sitting on Bitcoin podcasts like this, advocating for it, talking about why. I did some research recently as well. Here in Australia, the CPI calculation process, I think it had been changed like at least 10 times over the last 50 years, and mostly since 2000. There was a period in the 2012, 2014, every year it was changing. You're not comparing apples with apples when you're using the CPI. What?
Right, yeah. Yeah, it's funny because it's easy to see it now from our perspective, but the time that it takes for people to wrap their brain around Bitcoin, I don't think that it really is that the concepts and ideas are so complicated, and the 1, 2, 3 years that it takes in order to actually, start digging into Bitcoin for real. I think most of that is just working up the courage almost to kind of pull back the curtain on some of the lies rather than trying to wrap your brain around super technical concepts.
It's like you have to be both willing and able to make that step. Some people might be able to do it, but they're just not willing to go there yet. It's like, no, I can't. I'm not ready to open that box of discussion.
Right.
Michael, I'm keen to kind of cycle back a little bit. So you mentioned that you did a stats and finance degree. What was that like? What did you learn? And what have you done predominantly for your professional career since then?
Yeah, so I started off just doing a business finance degree, and I added a stats major alongside that. I generally enjoyed my stats classes a lot more. I liked the structure that it provided. In terms of real world application, I think in both of my degrees, most of it was a lot of the concepts that I learned I wasn't directly applying. But the one thing with stats that was very helpful was just being able to apply like an analytical framework to general decision making. That was very helpful. As far as both of them applied to my professional career, I worked in consulting for about 5 years after graduating. So not a direct application of either of those things exactly, but there's a lot of communication, a lot of kind of evaluating different options and presenting these to clients. So yeah, I think that they were generally helpful in my professional career, but not directly related.
Bitcoin Mentor is a consulting business. We're selling expertise in exchange for money, right? So that is consulting. That's very relevant. We can get to that further down the line. So, okay, so you've taken me through a bunch of these different things. Was there like an aha moment for you, or was it like a series of different things?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've tried to think back through that, and I don't know that I can remember an exact like orange pill moment. One of the ones that stands out to me a little bit is going back to kind of COVID times, and I guess a little bit after that. I was on a bit of a personal health journey. I had, like I said, I had played sports in college, and I was generally pretty physically healthy. I had hurt my knee playing rugby, and I had gained a bunch of weight in addition to working long hours in an office. And around 2021, 2022 started really taking my health seriously. And I started finding some of the kind of earlier connections, at least for me, between the degrading of our food supply and inflation. And that was a very, that moment really, really struck me. I remember doing some research about the 1971 Nixon shock, where Nixon brought us off the gold standard. And one thing that he was aware of at the time, and there are some different FOIA requests basically showing this, is the connection between rising food prices and civil unrest. And basically saying that the government at the time was very aware of this connection. And they realized that in taking us off the gold standard, that would drive up the real prices of food. And he hired this Secretary of Agriculture named Earl Butz, very appropriately named Earl Butz. And he basically put out billions of dollars worth of subsidies in the corn, sugar, soy industries, basically consolidated a bunch of farmland to hopefully drive down the cost of goods, and basically tried to hide some of the real cost of inflation that was going to come to products like beef and eggs and milk, fruit, vegetables, these things that we can't basically print out of thin air, and transition us to more of a synthetic, highly processed food diet. And there are some connections with the food pyramid and just some of the most damaging and horrific studies that came from this time. And basically the connection was trying to hide the cost, the real cost of inflation, knowing that if the price of foods went up, then that was one of the main drivers of social unrest and uprisings.
Wow. And so you mentioned this was in kind of 2021. You were looking at all this stuff.
Yeah. My first exposure to Bitcoin was 2017. I had no idea what was going on, but the price was going up. Everyone was talking about it. So I was trading it a little bit, truly had no idea what it was. And yeah, had,
YOLO.
right, basically. Yeah, I got punished appropriately, like bought at the top. What is
Tuition fees,
this? Like,
brother. Tuition
yep,
fees. Yeah.
right. And during kind of the early days of COVID, I was trying to make sense of the world a bit. I think I was mostly at the time looking for political solutions to some of the problems that we were facing. And I came across a super interesting anecdote that basically was talking about the Catholic Church. This is in like the 1400s, when they were basically charging the people at the time these crazy indulgences as a way to get into heaven. And they basically had a monopoly on all the information at the time. And the solution to that problem wasn't a political solution where, all right, let's get together and vote in a morally sound pope. The solution was a technological solution. It was a solution from the outside, and it was the printing press. And what the printing press let us do is print Bibles and give them out to everybody and have them read it for themselves and be like, oh my goodness, you guys are making this up. We've been lied to. So yeah, the early COVID days, I think I was distracted with politics. I look back on those days with shame almost, that I thought that we could work out some of the problems that we had with political solutions. That's really when I started really going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole and realizing that the solution to a lot of the problems that I was observing, I think was a technological solution. It was Bitcoin, it was fixing the money.
Mm. And that's actually kind of what you touched on in a sense with your interest in the American Revolution and the actual idea of building a brand new system. And I hear people talk about this quite a lot in the space, whether it's now Nostr that they're really excited about or Bitcoin, building a parallel system. It functions, people are happy, they're using it, and they're building lives and building businesses. And I find that very compelling. It's not that it's not in competition. Absolutely it is. But it doesn't have to be necessarily warfare to make it happen. Now, there's going to be some bumps in the road, don't get me wrong. There always will be. It's so interesting, though, isn't it? Thinking about, like, what would that have been like pre the Protestant Reformation and, like, Europe at the time and the power of the Catholic Church. And obviously you've got the rise of the Dutch and the British in comparison to, like, what had previously been, Central European driven powers. Absolutely extraordinary to think that you could now just read this book instead of going to the priest who was actually overtaxing you, being extremely dishonest, to use a word that came up before. And that's essentially what's going on today. I wonder, Michael, have you read Fiat Food?
I have, yeah, by Matthew Lezak, and I think Saifuddin Amus was involved in that as well.
Yeah,
Yeah, that
he
that was a
published it
fascinating
with
read.
his publishing
Mm.
business. For anyone out there that's interested in the connection between central banking, fiat currency, and food, that is an extremely comprehensive book written by an investigative journalist that was probably released last year. So after you
Yeah.
were down this rabbit hole, essentially, you'd made all these connections before, but um,
Well,
it's
I will say
incredibly
that
detailed.
yeah, that book really locked in a lot of the ideas
Mm,
for me. I found myself working long hours at my job, basically spending all day in the office, being outside very little. I grew up being very in nature, going to the beach a lot, camping, and I feel like I'd lost basically all connection to that. I think to a certain extent kind of felt trapped in the job that I was doing. And it was a good job and it checked a lot of the traditional boxes, but I felt like I was kind of running on a treadmill. I was trying to save my way to financial freedom. And um, yeah, there was some negative health side effects of that for sure. Around that time, I started kind of doing some, I guess, alternative research, trying to not find solutions within like big pharma and just hop on this pill and that'll fix it for you. Kind of trying to live life in a way that was more conducive to, I think, how we got here in the first place, which is spending time outside, eating real food, lifting heavy things, like sweating, having real connections with other people. And I think I'd lost a lot of that in kind of the rat race of working hard and saving and trying to become financially free in that way within a system that I think basically doesn't allow that to happen.
the education systems, they're brilliant at what they do in terms of spitting out like highly motivated workhorses that are going to be heavily taxed forever at the expense of their own health and their own happiness. But we think it's a good thing. So you
Right.
go charging out like, yeah, I want to work in consulting or whatever the profession might be, and you spend ridiculous amount of time obsessed with this kind of job and like bonuses and doing well for your boss and all this stuff that actually you were feeling like crap towards the end of it. And so teach us about, like, you're starting to make the connections between, maybe it's a technology that we need, not politics. Maybe it's actually money that's the problem here, and your health had deteriorated. So did you make some major changes? And I kind of like that whole thing of like, if you reach that inflection, if I don't change, nothing's going to happen. So did you quit that job, or how did you kind of navigate through that?
So just about a year ago at this point, so this is a little bit into kind of like trying to get my health back in order. I ended up taking a leave of absence from that job and going and traveling to Bali about a year ago now.
Such a cool
And
place.
oh yeah, it was awesome. I loved it there. And part of my I really had two main goals in approaching that. And one was to continue getting healthier, and the other was to basically follow my curiosity when it came to Bitcoin and see if I could get some jobs working in the Bitcoin space. And I guess somewhat of a long story short, um, by the time I'd gotten back from Bali, about I was there for a little over 3 months. I was interviewing with Bitcoin Mentor here, and I later got that after getting back. And then also was lucky enough with a friend of mine to get a job helping produce the What Is Money show. So
Cool.
basically, yeah, those are the two things that I'm doing now. I was able to quit my previous job, and yeah, I'm just thrilled to be doing things that I'm actually passionate about and that I care about. It's really a blessing.
And what a cool moment to get to as well, right? You're so true. Doing things with your time that actually you can see them making sense long term. And so there's lots to draw on there. So, okay, first of all, Bali, what a great place. The Indonesia Bitcoin conference was in October last year, which I was the MC for. And that was a fascinating experience because, unlike being just in Australia where I'd done a lot of meetups and events here, I suddenly was meeting people from Vietnam, people from Malaysia, people from Indonesia, of course, people from Singapore, all across Southeast Asia were meeting for this, like what was essentially the biggest Bitcoin conference in the area to date. There were some guys there, shout out to Piria, who'd come down from Bangkok. They'd run a big Bitcoin event there. But you realize it's a truly global thing. And you've touched on some problems that you faced, which is, your health had deteriorated and you're looking at a political situation that doesn't make sense. But what I find so fascinating about Bitcoin is it solves different problems from all over the world for different people. So did you have any conversations about Bitcoin when you were in Bali specifically? There's a good group of people that are now based there and building out businesses and stuff that you can go and visit.
Yeah. So I was able to meet a bunch of different Bitcoiners there. There's a newly opened Bitcoin House Bali that I haven't been to that I'm looking forward to going to.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I met, I guess, shout out my friends Petrus and Marius.
Yeah, Petrus legend. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was able to join the Bitcoin Bali Telegram group. We went to multiple beach walks and meetups and dinners together. Yeah, it really drove home the idea for me of Bitcoin as like a global movement. It really is a global community. And it was so cool meeting these people because as soon as you realize that you have Bitcoin in common with someone, you can immediately make some assumptions about who they are and what they value and the through lines of honesty and integrity. And yeah, I mean, my experience meeting and talking with other Bitcoiners has been, it's like mind blowing, the immediate connection that you feel with somebody who's a fellow Bitcoiner. It was awesome being out there and meeting a lot of those guys.
Yeah, shout out to Petrus for sure. He was one of the co-organizers of the event. So I spent quite a bit of time with him. He's been very kind with his time on previous conversations I've had with him about some other stuff. But anyone listening that hasn't yet been to a physical Bitcoin event, do it. Because as we've already touched on, there are a lot of questions you've got to ask, right, to get to this point of like, what is money? Where have I gone wrong so far? And what is dishonest? And hang on, am I getting taxed in a way that I don't understand? And I mean, it's a multi-year process of figuring this stuff out. But meeting people that have also asked those same questions and are at some point on the Bitcoin journey is incredibly validating.
That's something that really resonates with me because I don't view myself as exceptional really in any way. And I think one of the things that I'm trying to help my friends and family especially with is that Bitcoin is not just for the people who bought it when it was $1. What we're doing here basically is trying to build a new, honest, fair monetary system. And you can join that and be a part of it with us. And you don't need to be some super genius, shadowy coder in order to pull it off. It's like, I think part of what we're trying to do with Bitcoin Mentor even is like help build the bridge, and as Saylor says, and then go stand on it and show people that, hey, we're using this new thing as our money. We're gaining purchasing power because of that. And our lives are improving along the way in these strange ways that people almost laugh at when they hear because it sounds so absurd. But yeah, it's fascinating to share the Bitcoin story, like your own Bitcoin story, with people who are not Bitcoiners yet. And they think that, like, they almost look at you like you're crazy. I mean, I get a lot of that here and at my previous job. The amount of people who tried to talk me off the ledge and convince me I was crazy was, I mean, basically all of them. But
that's because they're almost projecting onto you their own fear. Oh, what do you mean you can get out of this rat race? That's not allowed. You have to do this until you're 55, and then you might be able to retire as a partner of this business. And that is an option. Absolutely, it's an option. But is it the best one? Is it the right one? Is it the ethical one?
Right. I think that's exactly right. Part of why, I mean, I just remember it almost being like a meme in the office that I would, of course, connect everything back to Bitcoin always, as we do as Bitcoiners.
You become the Bitcoin guy. It's like, Woodhouse, just shut up, mate.
Yeah. Right.
I know what you mean. You end up in those situations, let's call it the water cooler moment, and somehow you'll manage to bring the topic back to like, well, the money's broken and that's why we're in this problem. And people get frustrated with it in some ways. Although I'm now intrigued to ask, Michael, so when you are a consultant working in the space that you were working in, did you specialize in a particular area? And what did you pick up in terms of your skill set from that? The skills that that type of role gives you at the end of doing it for a sustained period of time are reapplicable in basically every area of business. And often, like, it's really impressive what ex-consultants are able to go and build as a result of doing those jobs. Can you run me through some of the highlights?
Yeah, so the specific niche that I was in is basically working with structural engineers and fire protection engineers in order to permit commercial storage facilities. So most of the work that we were doing was for companies like Amazon. It's really any of these companies that are involved with online stores, which has been, we kind of rode that wave a bit. I mean, I can't remember the last time I went to a brick and mortar store and
Mm.
didn't just order something online. And all of those products need to be stored somewhere. And there's a whole host of different permits and regulations and codes that they need to abide by. So we worked alongside the structural engineers and the fire protection engineers to make sure that what they were doing was code compliant. Um, what I was able to learn from that was uh, basically taking complex ideas and then distill them down into kind of the bare bones ideas that the people making the actual decisions needed to know. I'm trying to cut out all the different fluff and getting too distracted on different, rabbit trails here and there, and really just outline exactly the information that they needed and present it in a way that they were going to understand and have clarity with. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a very clear connection with that and Bitcoin Mentor, talking somebody through the basics of setting up a wallet and managing their keys and their seed phrase, trying to cut out a lot of the fluff and a lot of the different kind of buzzwords that people hear and their brains turn off right away. Basically, I've noticed even in the sessions that I've completed so far, being able to pull some from the preparation work that I learned how to do in consulting, and then hopefully communicating the ideas in a way that's clear and concise and that they resonate with.
Awesome. And Bitcoin needs that, right? Because Bitcoin's not easy. What is SHA-256 and what is mining? And hang on a second, what the hell's a multi-sig? And there's all this technical stuff that's going on, plus the Austrian economic insight on sound money and what it means to have inflation and how inflation is only ever from money supply. So like a genuinely multifaceted beast that requires a whole load of different things at the same time, and go, okay, this makes sense. And so it's brilliant that people like yourselves are being drawn in, because you can help distill what is something very complex into something quite simple. And that
Mm-hmm.
draws me nicely to then. So you've completed some sessions. That's fantastic. What kind of problem were you solving for your customers? And just if someone was out there either listening because they want to be a protege of yours as a mentor, or equally someone who wants to potentially join the team as a mentor, what were some of the highlights of that experience?
Most of my sessions have been with people who are very new to Bitcoin, which I love. We have different people on the team that are incredibly technically gifted. In our weekly meetings, I'm learning tons of stuff
Yeah, it's
every
cool.
single time. I'm just trying
Yeah.
to absorb it. Um, but yeah, where I've really kind of found a little bit of a niche is helping people who maybe have bought a little bit of Bitcoin and still have it on the exchange, or people who have talked to their friends and decided, all right, I'd like to actually get a little bit of a position here. So yeah, most of my sessions have been with people who are very new to Bitcoin, who are just trying to wrap their brains around the very basics of what a wallet is, what a seed phrase is, how everything works behind the scenes, how to send a transaction, how to receive a transaction, how to manage UTXOs, really kind of the bare bones stuff that people need to understand in order to set up a wallet and secure their Bitcoin properly. In my experience, the biggest problems people have are not the how difficult it is technically to set up a wallet and follow a set of instructions. A pretty clear through line is people being kind of nervous and afraid to dip their toe in the water and start the actual process. The process of setting up a wallet, in my experience, has been something that people can kick down the road for months or years at a time. And I think it's helpful sometimes to have somebody who can come alongside you if for no other reason than to kind of get the process going, like, all right, I'm going to set up a session with this person. We're going to set a time to do it, and we're going to actually follow through on it rather than just saying that that's something I'll worry about in a year from now. Yeah, I think that the process of actually just taking action on it and kind of getting past the initial nervousness and fear is big for people.
And you're so right. That resonates for me a lot in terms of it's actually not hard to set up a Bitcoin wallet, to buy Bitcoin, to send, to receive, to just simply save in Bitcoin, to hodl, as we like to say, for years at a time. Once you've got it set up, and there's then things you can do with your inheritance plan, etc., etc. None of it's all that difficult. But if you're doing it for the first time, it's like, what if I get this wrong?
Mm-hmm.
And if anything's true about Bitcoin, it's taking responsibility for your wealth. And the truth is, if you get it wrong and you send it somewhere and you don't control the destination that you've sent it to in some way, then it's gone. So you are taking full control. But if you get it wrong, the downside is, well, it's gone, mate. Like, you can't do anything
Right.
about that. So there's very reasonable fear there. And we've all made these mistakes, right? There's people that have been in Bitcoin now for over a decade because it's been around for that long, and they did this a lot. And at the time, they were moving around like 10 Bitcoins, and they just lost it. It's like, damn it! Imagine if I had that today. And so by being able to access Bitcoin Mentor, you're paying, of course, a healthy rate to get this expertise, but you cut all those mistakes out and you cut straight to the point. Over the years, can you think of any silliest circumstances that you got yourself into in terms of trying to figure out Bitcoin or sending it to the wrong place?
I don't know of any mistakes I've made in the actual like setting up a wallet process. The biggest mistake I made was delaying.
Delaying
So
purchase or delaying moving it around or?
delaying moving it off of the exchange. I think initially I felt some sort of comfort with having other people be responsible for some of my money. I think that's like some of that fiat mindset where I
There's a
didn't
customer
want.
service line. Yeah.
Yeah, right, exactly. So yeah, I mean, this led to the FTX collapse. I remember getting my Bitcoin off of FTX man, it was about a week before
Well,
shit really hit the fan, and people lost their Bitcoin. But that was something I had bought a wallet, and it was just sitting on my desk waiting to be set up. And I mean, I was fortunate that I had it at the time, but I was able to take the action before I ended up losing it, or I would have ended up losing it. So yeah, the aspect of delaying and being willing and kind of happy to push off some of the responsibility onto these other people that they're super smart and I can trust them. And really, you start to realize that, like you said, Bitcoin is like personal responsibility technology. You need to take responsibility for yourself and for your money and your savings. And if you delay on that too long, I think eventually it's just a matter of time before you get burned.
hmm. And it is, again, that's that point. It's hard to see, but once you see it, it's hard to unsee. And you just come across so many questions, don't you? Like, how do I do this? What does it mean? I want to come back to something that you mentioned, which was how your life is improving as a result of Bitcoin. So could you take me through like maybe two or three situations or literally how you feel as a result of these changes you've made? And maybe like if you think back to like 5 years into consulting and you feel like shit and you're like, what am I going to do versus today?
That's a great question. Well, I think it's made me a much more honest person. It's made me really realize the value of telling the truth. When I think back through my own life, there's not a single example I can think of where I told a lie and I got away with it. And maybe you can tell a white lie here and there, but the payment for that on the back end is that you need to go to sleep at night and have that eating at your conscience. So I don't think that's getting away with it just because somebody didn't, find you out. And yeah, I think that Bitcoin has let me basically take real account of the things that I value, and it's shown me the value of telling the truth in my own life and the idea that you can't lie and get away with it, I think, is really true. And when you look at something like fiat currencies generally, these things are dishonest and they're telling a lie, and there is no getting away with that. Like the rooster will come home to roost, or whatever the saying is. So yeah, I think that's probably the single biggest improvement, is it making very clear the value of telling the truth in all situations. And it's really difficult to do that when, you know, the base layer way in which you communicate with each other and you provide value to the world, which is through money, is corrupted and dishonest. I think the downstream effects of that are just super negative. I think it leads to dishonesty in basically everything that it touches. So yeah, maybe a bit of a strange answer there, but
No, it's brilliant. Well said, Michael. I mean, it's transformative. Like, it's very, very hard to underplay how massive Bitcoin is from a social perspective, a physical perspective, a spiritual perspective. Basically, every single facet of your life, like it or not, is affected by money. And unless you've asked the question, what is money, then you're just hideously unprepared for like real life. And by asking what is money, you realize that we've actually used lots of different things of money over multiple different generations. And it's been a consistent iteration of trial and error. And we've regularly got it wrong. But every time we've built on the previous mistakes. And Bitcoin is just another iteration of money. And for some reason, it's very, very difficult for people to even go through that process of figuring all that out. But well said. I mean, it fundamentally shifts the way that you live your life. And for that reason, it is a very spiritual process. Like, even these conversations we're having on the Bitcoin Mentor podcast, and listening to the amount of talent that is being drawn into this new technology, this new system, and is willing to team together and build out new businesses and help people to reach these similar points. It's mad, and it's a great thing to be part of. I must say, shout out to Robert Breedlove. Robert came on my podcast Bitcoin with Jake back in 2022, probably. I'll never forget when his What Is Money show first dropped, and it was like 6 hours of him and Sailor talking about like triremes in the Mediterranean. You're like, holy shit, what is this stuff? So you mentioned you're a producer of that show at the moment. Is that a role you're still doing? And what's
yeah.
like behind the scenes and helping build out a media product like that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I love what I do. As a quick aside, it is always funny to me when I recommend the Sailor series as a kind of like first touch point for people. And Sailor's talking about like beavers, and these people are like, what is going on here? What is this guy? Yeah, what rabbit hole is he sending me down here? But yeah, I love the work that I do there. I'm basically just helping with anything that we need in order to make the show run. So whether that be time stamping episodes, cutting clips, making thumbnails, making edits, finding people to have on the show, writing up different Substack articles, and yeah, I mean it really is kind of, it's stuff that I would do if I wasn't getting paid mostly. It's a huge blessing that I get to do that for work, because yeah, I never have the feeling of wanting to cut a corner. I remember at my previous job, sometimes it's like, all right, that's good enough. Let's just toss it out there. And I think what I'm doing now with Bitcoin Mentor and the What Is Money show, cutting a corner never even crosses my mind. I truly want everything I'm doing to be to the best of my ability. And that makes the work that I'm doing really fun. And that's just a huge blessing, especially coming from, a profession where that wasn't exactly the case.
And so someone out there who might be listening is still a consultant in a traditional fiat job, and they're listening to you talking about how Bitcoin's improved your life, how you now work in the Bitcoin industry. Do you have any advice for them as to how they might go through a similar evolution themselves?
That's a great question. Well, none of this happened overnight for me. So that's probably an important thing to even preface this with. It was a multi-year, and it continues to be a multi-year journey. I think that a good place to start is well, I think buying a little bit of Bitcoin is probably a decent place to start.
Yeah, amen to
Uh,
that. Absolutely.
yeah. But I think also just following your curiosity. And it's possible that, I think it's probably likely that, this example, maybe they're not as passionate and interested in the topic of Bitcoin as somebody like, me or you are. So it's not that they need to uproot their entire lives and go work in the Bitcoin space necessarily. But I think that starting by just allowing yourself to be curious, kind of allowing yourself to believe, and just starting by taking a single step, whether that is just watching an initial Bitcoin podcast, reaching out to a friend that maybe had some interest in it, realizing that it's a long journey. There's no, well, you don't want to rush, but I think you want to move with a sense of urgency because, the future is uncertain, and that's part of the reason why we buy Bitcoin in the first place.
It without a doubt has improved my future self. So like that idea of like you're buying confidence in some ways, and that doesn't have to be Bitcoin specifically. That's what sound money does, and that's definitely that's an economics question, and it's a whole nother rabbit hole in itself. So I recommend anyone to roll down that rabbit hole because that helps to explain how the world actually works from the perspective of an individual rather than a central planner, which is how, without realizing it, we were all taught through school. I just want to touch on one thing that you mentioned, which is just buying a little bit of Bitcoin. And I'm the same in that I feel very strongly about this. And it's because of having skin in the game. So I always give this similar-ish kind of analogy being like if I go to a horse race and there's a whole book of different riders and they've got different colored suits on or whatever, different helmets. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to choose the pink one with a stupid name. And for like 5 minutes, you're obsessed because you put $10 on this one horse that it's going to win. And whether it does or doesn't matter. But the point being is that because you've got money riding on that horse, your attention is much more locked in. And that's kind of the same with Bitcoin, is by buying a little bit of it, you're suddenly connected to like the price movements and any news articles that pop up or any books that might appear relevant or any podcast. And it's that connection that helps you dive down the rabbit hole a little further. So that's great advice. I completely agree with you on that front.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because, at least in my experience, when people try to rush the process of adopting Bitcoin, it typically doesn't work out well. It typically means that they're dumping in a bunch of money at the top before the price crashes, and then they sell because they're jaded and resentful.
This thing's
And
broken.
yeah, right. So yeah, I mean, I think like the a reasonable place to start is exactly what you laid out, where you start just a small DCA. You kind of allow yourself to be on the team with the rest of us. Maybe you start to follow along a little bit, and yeah, like you said, when you have a little bit of skin in the game, it makes it, well, when you have a little bit of skin in the game and you realize that you're not too late, I think that opens up people's minds a lot. I think a lot of the reason why people are not receptive to Bitcoin is I think that they've missed it. That's, as soon as they realize that they haven't missed it, a lot of the arm's length criticisms that people have kind of fall away. So I think that's why starting with just buy a little bit, you don't have to be crazy and you don't have to be like us crazy people and put every single penny in there, but just kind of allow yourself to get a little bit of exposure so you realize that you're not too late, and kind of the journey will take care of itself from there.
And Michael, I have to ask, like, we've got time for like one last question, essentially. So thank you very much for teaching us all this. Why, if you're buying Bitcoin today, are you not too late?
Well, this is a great question. Well, so I don't think it's ever too late to adopt an absolutely scarce form of money. The very nature of it is that, let me kind of collect my thoughts here. I think it's kind of just obviously not true if you just look at the people around you. Those of us who are Bitcoiners are still considered the crazy ones. And I've tried to frame it to people as use part of your fear in adopting, in buying some Bitcoin. There's some fear surrounding that. What if the price crashes? I think that fear can be also viewed as opportunity, because other people in your same exact situation are afraid of the same exact things that you're afraid of. And as soon as nobody is afraid of buying Bitcoin and everyone knows that it's the best money that has ever been found or created, then it's not exactly that you're too late, but because you're never too late to benefit from what Bitcoin is doing for the world, what sound money is doing for the world.
This is such a fundamental technology. It's similar to fire. It's similar to the wheel. It's similar to the number zero. Shout out to Robert Breedlove.
Yep.
It's mobile technology. It's the internet. It's as fundamental as that. Digitally native, censorship resistant, peer-to-peer money. Cool. The history of money, you look at the way that gold was used, or silver as an example. There were nations that were like, no, we use silver instead of gold. And those nations suffered for a very, very long time until they adopted gold. So the reason people aren't too late to Bitcoin, even today, is that simply adopting a superior technology is always going to be better than the status quo. So you can continue to use your nation state's fiat currency as long as it exists. But every day that you do that, you're missing the gains of what is essentially a far superior technology. So that's why I always say it. It's like, okay, do you want to make a phone call that costs you £10 or that costs 10 cents? It's like, well, obviously you'll go with the one that's much cheaper. Okay. Or is it like much faster, or is it much stronger, or whatever the case might be? So to me, it's like it's a 10x improvement in technology. And that's why you're never going to be late, because it's just way better than what you're currently using.
I think that's a great framing, actually, because it's not too late to adopt
Yeah, it's like,
email
do you want
as
to
your
use
standard form of
landline, or do you
communication.
want
Yeah, right. Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't think people are too late today, and I don't think that will be the case basically forever, because when you have a form of money that is absolutely scarce and decentralized and censorship resistant, then it's never too late to take some of your fiat shitcoin and convert it to the superior form of money.
And to draw all the way back to what we touched on at the start about dishonesty and understanding that your energy and your time was being stolen from you, you're moving into a system where that's not the case. And that's a big change. Oh, well, Michael, what a journey. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. So my final question as we close things out is, if someone's interested in having you as their mentor, how do they reach out and get in touch?
They can reach out to me directly by email. It's michael.sutherlin@bitcoinmentor.io, or they can obviously go to the bitcoinmentor.io website and check out all of the different mentor pages. I would be thrilled to help. You can do a free call, which I'd be happy to hop on with you and answer any questions that you have.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Michael.
Thanks, Jake. I appreciate it.